The human lived at the edge of a frozen world where the land stretched wide and empty. He had chosen the place because it was quiet, and because quiet let him think. The cabin he built was small but solid, shaped by hands that remembered storms from other worlds. Each morning he stepped outside and watched the horizon, reading the snow and the sky. The aliens arrived slowly over time. At first they were distant shapes, moving along the ridges, watching, learning, curious. They were taller than the human, with long limbs and bright eyes that reflected the pale light. They spoke among themselves freely, assuming the human could not understand. They found his presence amusing. One human alone with a single cabin on a planet known for killing storms. They laughed at his careful movements, and his habit of checking the wind before walking far. They laughed when he reinforced the roof and cleared snow before it piled to hide the human. Noticed them but did not react. He had learned long ago that attention was a resource best spent carefully. Instead he focused on his routines, chopping, hauling, measuring, waiting. The land taught patience, and the human listened. Every evening he marked changes in the air, subtle shifts in pressure. The way the human began the second wall without announcement or explanation. At dawn he dragged metal sheets from the snow, half-buried relics from old crashes. He hauled stone from the frozen ground, chipping it free with steady, controlled strikes. The aliens noticed immediately. They gathered closer this time, no longer hiding on the ridges. Their voices carried easily across the open land, filled with humor and disbelief. They asked each other why one wall was not enough. Why a creature so small would waste strength on caution. They circled him freely, watching every movement, certain they understood him. The human did not look at them. He measured distance between posts, tested weight, pressed his palm against the wind. Memory guided him more than plants. Winters layered inside his bones. The second wall rose slowly, not tall but thick. It was built to break wind, to trap warmth, to hold when pressure came from all sides. Every piece had a reason, even if the reason was invisible. The aliens mocked openly now. They kicked loose snow, laughed at the rough construction, called it primitive. They believed intelligence meant speed, not stillness, and power meant movement, not waiting. The human paused, once resting his hands against the cold surface. His breath fogged, slowly, steady, controlled. He remembered a storm from long ago, another world, another shelter, another lesson learned too late. Then he kept building, hour after hour. The wall closed around the cabin, leaving narrow paths and sealed corners. The work was exhausting but familiar, like speaking a language no one else knew. As the sun dipped low, the air tightened. The human felt it first, a pressure change, a warning whisper in the cold. The aliens felt nothing, and laughed even louder. The second wall stood unfinished but purposeful, a promise made against what was coming. And the human trusted promises built with effort. More than laughter carried by the wind. Morning arrived muted and heavy, as if the world was holding its breath. The sky was no longer bright but layered with dull moving shadows. The human stepped outside and felt the difference immediately in his lungs and ears. He adjusted his plans without speaking. The wall needed to close certain angles before night returned. He worked faster now, not rushed, but focused, every motion efficient. The aliens returned earlier than usual. They watched from closer than before, curiosity edging out humor. They commented on the sky, but dismissed it as normal weather patterns. Human tested the snow with his boot. It cracked differently, brittle and dry, a sign of deep cold forming above. He gathered additional material, reinforcing the lowest sections of the wall. The wind shifted direction twice in a single hour. To the aliens, it meant nothing. To the human, it meant the storm was searching for weaknesses. As he worked, memories surfaced uninvited, a settlement buried under ice, a warning ignored, voices lost to white noise and darkness. He shook the thoughts away and kept moving. The present demanded attention more than the past. The aliens began to grow restless. They moved, often paced, laughed louder, as if noise could dismiss uncertainty. One of them struck the wall experimentally and felt the dull resistance. The human finally looked at them, then, not with anger or fear but with quiet calculation. He wondered briefly if they would survive the coming days. By afternoon the light thinned, further shadows stretched. Even though the sun remained high, the temperature dropped, in sudden steps, not gradual but sharp. The human sealed a corner and packed snow into every gap. His hands burned, then numbed, then burned again. Pain was information, and he listened. Above them, the clouds began to rotate slowly, a wide, deliberate movement, easy to miss if one did not know what to look for. The aliens kept talking, laughing, speculating. The human went inside briefly to prepare supplies. When he returned, the first grains of hard ice struck the wall and did not melt. He did not smile. He only worked faster because now the storm had spoken and it was no longer a distant threat but a moving decision. And the second wall was no longer an idea but a necessity. Aliens arrived in a larger group than before, drawn by curiosity and boredom. They surrounded the cabin openly, their tall forms stark against the whitening land. They touched the second wall, pushing, testing, pressing their weight against it. Laughter rolled easily, confident and careless. They made jokes about how thin it was, how low, how easily they could step over it. The human stayed focused on his task. He reinforced the inner corners where wind liked to trap itself. He added weight at the base, knowing storms always tried to lift before they crushed. One alien struck the wall harder this time. The sound traveled dull and heavy, not the sharp crack they expected. A brief pause followed, then more laughter, louder than before. The human did not respond. He listened instead to the wind shifting again, now carrying a faint, distant howl. It was not sound, but pressure moving across the land. The aliens began to challenge one another. They boasted of surviving worse climates, of moving faster than any storm. They mocked the idea of hiding behind stone and Human straightened, briefly stretching his aching back. His breath formed a steady cloud before his face. He glanced at the horizon where the sky and ground blurred together. Low vibration passed through the snow. Subtle, easy to miss, but unmistakable. To someone who had felt it before, the storm was aligning itself, choosing direction and strength. The aliens felt something then, though they did not understand it. Their movements slowed slightly, their voices changed pitch. Still they laughed, unwilling to release their certainty. The human sealed the final exposed section of the wall. He pressed his hand flat against it, feeling the cold and the promise of resistance. The structure was complete, not impressive, not elegant, but ready. The wind surged. Suddenly, hard enough to stagger one of the aliens. Surprise flickered through their group quickly, masked by humor. They stepped back, instinctively clustering closer together. The human gathered his tools without haste. He moved supplies inside the cabin, securing the door behind the second wall. The first true gust of the coming blizzard struck with force. Snow lifted violently off the ground, stinging exposed skin. The aliens turned toward the sky, uncertain for the first time, and the human knew the window for laughter had closed. The storm was no longer approaching, it had arrived. The temperature dropped suddenly, without warning. Cold pressed inward from every direction, stealing breath and strength. The aliens reacted too late. Their laughter broke apart into sharp, confused voices. They moved quickly but without direction, unsure where safety truly lay. Wind tore across the open ground, lifting snow like living waves. Visibility collapsed into shifting white walls. Distance vanished, and sound became meaningless. The human stayed inside the cabin. He added weight to the inner door and sealed vents with layered cloths. The second wall absorbed the first impact, shuddering but holding firm. Outside, the aliens struggled to stay upright. Their long limbs that once seemed graceful worked against them. Ice formed along their skin and joints, slowing every movement. They tried to retreat to higher ground, but the storm erased landmarks. Each step became a guess, each guess a risk. Fear replaced pride as survival demanded. Focus, the wind screamed, now no longer playful or distant. It slammed into bodies and structures with relentless force. Snow-filled eyes, mouths, thoughts. The aliens looked toward the cabin through the chaos. A faint, steady glow marked its position. The second wall broke the wind, creating a pocket of relative comfort. The first time they understood the purpose of preparation. Strength alone could not stop what had no shape, and no mercy. Movement meant nothing. When the world itself was in motion inside, the human listened to the storm, read its rhythm, and waited. He had built not to fight the blizzard but to endure it, and endurance was something the land respected. Outside, the storm tightened its grip, and the lesson continued without words. Night arrived without darkness because the storm erased all difference. Time lost meaning as wind and snow ruled every moment. The aliens were scattered now, silhouettes swallowed and revealed at random. They called out to each other, but the storm tore their voices apart. Each one stood alone, even when close enough to touch. Cold invaded their bodies steadily. It was not sharp anymore, but deep and heavy. Movement slowed, thought narrowed, and panic burned precious energy. Some tried to huddle together, turning backs to the wind. Others kept moving, believing speed could still save them. The storm punished both choices without preference. Ice formed along ridges of skin and joints. Flexibility failed, strength faded, and exhaustion followed. The land took what it was offered, without judgment. The cabin remained a fixed point in the chaos. The second wall redirected wind, forcing it upward and around. Snow piled high, but did not breach the barrier inside. The human moved carefully, conserving heat and motion. He checked supports, listened for stress, and adjusted weight. Every sound meant something, every vibration told a story. He rationed light, keeping only what was needed. Warmth was layered, not wasted. Waiting was active, not passive. Outside, one alien fell and did not rise. Another stopped laughing and began to crawl. Pride dissolved as survival instincts stripped everything else away. They saw the wall more clearly now, not as an obstacle, but as shelter. It was not beautiful, but it was honest. It made no promises beyond holding an alien. Reached the edge of the protected zone and felt the difference immediately. The wind lessened enough to breathe. Hope flared, fragile and desperate. They pressed close to the wall, shielding themselves from the worst of the storm. More followed, drawn by instinct, not understanding. The cluster grew silent, unified by necessity. The storm intensified again. It tested the wall from every angle. The structure groaned but did not fail. Inside, the human felt the strain and added weight to critical points. He braced beams, reinforced corners, and trusted the design. Experience guided his hands. More than fear, hours passed, or maybe only minutes. The storm did not care. It roared, consumed, and waited outside. The aliens endured by inches. Each moment survived, reshaped their understanding. They learned that preparation was not weakness. It was respect for forces that could not be challenged. The blizzard continued, and in its heart the human shelter held a quiet refusal to yield. In a world built to test resolve, the blizzard raged through the night, relentless and blind. Snow whipped horizontally, stinging, exposed skin and filling every crevice of the landscape. The aliens pressed against the second wall, struggling to maintain footing. Their bodies shook from cold and fear. Voices were whispers, lost to the wind. The human moved inside, calmly adjusting supports, shifting supplies. Every action deliberate, controlled. He monitored the wall, feeling the strain and listening to the storm's rhythm. Outside, visibility dropped to near nothing. Landmarks vanished, swallowed by moving ice. Even instinct became unreliable. One alien tried to break free, moving away from the shelter. The wind caught it like a living hand, lifting and twisting it. Staggered back to the wall, its pride shattered. Another alien huddled in a shallow depression in the snow. Its long limbs wrapped around itself, shivering uncontrollably. Even thinking became difficult. Energy consumed by survival. The human opened a small flap, just enough to throw in additional snow reinforcement. The wind sucked at it, but the wall held steady inside. He breathed slowly, steadying his pulse, feeling the storm's power rather than fighting it. The aliens learned quickly the difference between chaos and order. They could see the cabin light flickering behind the second wall. It was faint, but constant, a point of reference in the endless white. Hours of struggle past the storm, tested every weakness, every small crack. The wall groaned and shuddered but refused to break. By the time the first faint light of dawn filtered through the blizzard, the aliens were exhausted, silent, and humbled. They no longer mocked the human or his walls. Their eyes reflected something new: understanding, respect, and fear. Inside, the human stirred, prepared to face another day. The storm was not over, but he had endured. And endurance had a language the aliens had only just begun to understand. The blizzard continued its assault, but its fury had shifted into a relentless grinding. The wind no longer roared, but pressed and pushed with constant weight. Snow scoured the landscape, shaping drifts and hiding the familiar. The aliens moved cautiously along the edge of the second wall, every step measured, every movement deliberate. They no longer spoke loudly, their confidence replaced by awareness. Some tried to peer over the top of the wall, feeling its height and strength. They tested corners, carefully, realizing the design was precise and purposeful. The shelter was not magical, but it was built for survival and nothing else. The human remained inside, watching the storm through a small, clear section of ice. He felt the pressure shifts, understood the flow of wind and snow. Every second passed with the awareness of what could happen if one miscalculated. The aliens began to mimic small movements. They saw one pressed a limb against a reinforced corner and felt the cold resistance. Another crouched behind a mound of snow, learning the lesson of patience and cover. Fear became respect, pride gave way to understanding. The storm was a teacher, and the cabin a testament. Through the whirling snow, they could see faint, steady lights. From inside, a beacon of persistence and careful labor. They moved closer, instinctively drawn to the protection it offered. The human prepared supplies for anyone who reached the door. He did not fear the aliens, but acknowledged them as part of the lesson. Endurance could be shared, but only with respect and awareness. As the hours passed, the storm lost some of its bite. It remained powerful, relentless, but no longer unpredictable. The aliens clung to the second wall, learning its limits. They had survived through observation and adaptation. For the first time they saw the human not as weak or foolish, but as someone who had mastered patience and preparation. And in that understanding they began to change silently. The blizzard raged on, but the cabin and its second wall held firm. When the storm finally began to ease, the landscape looked unrecognizable. Snowdrifts, buried ridges and rocks. Landmarks vanished under layers of white. The wind still blew, but its roar had softened into a steady cold sigh. The aliens emerged slowly from their positions, pressed against the second wall. Their movements were cautious, tentative, aware of every step. They surveyed the damage and the shelter that had protected them. The human opened the cabin door slightly and stepped outside. His boots sank into the snow, but his posture remained steady. He did not rush, he did not speak, he only observed. The aliens gathered near the wall silently, no longer mocking, no longer laughing. Their eyes reflected exhaustion and a new kind of respect. They had learned the cost of underestimating what could not be fought with strength alone. The second wall stood solid and unbroken. It had absorbed the fury of the blizzard, held warmth, and provided refuge. It was simple in construction but perfect in function. The human moved among them, handing what supplies he had stored. They accepted with hesitant hands, learning trust from action rather than words. Their pride was quieted, replaced by understanding. For the first time they saw the human not as weak, not as foolish, but as wise. Patience and preparation had created safety where none should exist. The lesson was harsh but clear. Survival required more than speed or size. The sky began to lighten, revealing the frozen world, battered but still intact. The aliens looked at the cabin, the second wall, and the human standing calm and steady. They knew they had witnessed something beyond mockery, beyond challenge. The storm had passed, but its mark remained. The aliens were changed, humbled, aware that endurance mattered more than laughter. And the human remained a figure of quiet strength, a reminder that foresight could save lives. Silence stretched across the white land, broken only by the sound of careful movement. The blizzard was over, but the memory of it would remain forever.